This is going to be the orientation to a DBT video, which sets up the couple of videos about motion regulation. And the idea here is that we're moving from the cognitive behavioral material that we presented in last week's webinar to the July 3rd webinar about DBT itself. So I'm going to cover some topics that kind of move from more traditional CBT into the kind of third wave mindfulness-based treatment that DBT represents. So let me start off. Actually, I'm going to be reading from a book by Marshall Linehan called Cognitive Behavioral Treatment of Borderline Personality Disorder. And I'll also just mention the corresponding skills training manual. And these would be basic texts. Actually, they're listed in the bibliography in the syllabus as fundamental DBT texts. These were published in 1993, based on work that had been really developed, been conducted through the 80s. So DBT has been around since that time. So let me just read what Marcia had to say in defining some of the differences between standard cognitive behavior therapies and DBT. So a number of aspects of DBT set it off from usual cognitive and behavior therapy. One is the focus on acceptance and validation of behavior as it is in the moment. Two, the emphasis on treating therapy-interfering behaviors. Third, the emphasis on the therapeutic relationship as essential to the treatment. And fourth, the focus on dialectical processes. So, we can come back a little bit to the issue of depth. And we talked in the forum posts about it. It's a pretty standard idea that people have that cognitive behavioral therapies do not go to the kind of depth that more psychodynamic or object relations therapies might have, that they're going to be more treating symptoms. And it's true that the first stage of DBT is really aimed at helping people overcome behaviors that are really dangerous to their lives, likely to end their lives, suicidal, self-harm behaviors, as well as behaviors that make their lives absolutely impossible, whether that be substance abuse, violent behavior, eating disorders, a variety of different things that really need to be addressed before you obviously at the level of suicidal behavior, if someone's not alive, you can't help them go deeper into the problems in their lives. That said, and we're going to be next week in the webinar, actually on the July 10th, I guess, we'll be welcoming back those colleagues of yours who have been in the trauma class. It'll be really interesting to kind of talk with them, compare notes a little bit about the degree to which there are some fundamental similarities to trauma treatments. DBT certainly is a trauma treatment. The category diagnostic category for which it was sort of initially designed, that of borderline personality disorder. Somewhere around 70–75% of the women who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder have been sexually molested, as opposed to about 25% in the general population. So it is fair to say that DBT really is a trauma treatment program. And we'll be talking about the stages of treatment in DBT, the second of which really explicitly is aimed at the trauma treatment per se. But like other trauma treatment programs, we have to begin by strengthening clients so that they can tolerate the typically upsetting process of going back into the traumatic material. So when those folks from the trauma class come in, we'll do a little note comparing here about some ways that DBT bears similarity to the other kinds of trauma treatment programs that are out there. So I wanted to mention that in relation to the depth issue, because by and large we consider that depth has to do with treating trauma that has occurred in the past. That's a pretty conventional, common idea about what constitutes depth. I've also spoken earlier, though, to the issue that in moving to the transpersonal dimension of things, DBT enters realms of depth that have been related to by Jungian and psychodynamic models and so on. Jungian treatment is sometimes called depth psychology because it goes down to the level of what is most intimately close to us and yet at the same time universally found in human experience. So the association of depth comes up also in relation to the emphasis on the therapeutic relationship. And I think it's appropriately leveled as a criticism of more standard cognitive behavioral approaches, that they are far less interested in the relationship than in trying to bring about changes in thoughts and behaviors. In DBT, the relationship is considered truly crucial. And so here's another thing that Marcia has to say about it. My emphasis on the therapeutic relationship as crucial to progress in DBT comes primarily from my work in interventions with suicidal individuals. At times, this relationship is the only thing that keeps them alive. Behavior therapists attend to the therapeutic relationship, but have not historically given it the prominence that I give it in DBT. And she also mentions some other behavioral therapists, Kohlenberg and Tsai, who have developed functional analytic therapy. I mentioned that in the Three Ways article, which also, in which the vehicle of change really is considered to be the relationship between the therapist and patient. Their thinking has influenced the development of DBT. So just wanted to mention that, and actually we'll see as we go through the next few weeks that the DBT has some rather special rules about how the relationship is carried out with clients, and that actually allow us as therapists to get in very, very close. We're allowed to reveal more about ourselves than psychodynamic therapists are, for example, in the context of establishing the kind of relationship that will help keep someone alive, as well as the opportunity to use our own life experience to teach skills with these clients. And so we'll be talking about that. Having a really warm and interpersonally close relationship with clients is one of the things that I really like about the DBT as a model. So the importance of the therapeutic relationship. I also just want to say one more thing about the focus on acceptance and validation of behavior as it is in the moment. Marcia goes on to say that although acceptance of patients as they are is crucial to any good therapy, DBT goes a step further than standard cognitive behavioral therapy in emphasizing the necessity of teaching patients to accept themselves and their world as it is in the moment. Thus, a technology of acceptance is as important as the technology of change. It's one of the things that has irritated people, including myself, about more standard CBT, is that there's such an emphasis on getting people to change. And so to have that be balanced with acceptance processes like mindfulness and like validation really helps me feel much better about it. And I'm hoping it will you as well. All right, so those remarks as a bridge about the ways that DBT differs from more standard CBT. So there's a few things that I want to talk about that are pretty basic here. I mentioned that these books came out in 1993. And you can tell from the title that DBT was originally developed as a treatment for borderline personality disorder. Marcia Linehan, I also mentioned, where did I mention that? I guess I mentioned it in the webinar last week. That Marcia had herself been a suicidal client, quite deeply disturbed. She was in the psych hospital in Massachusetts for about 2 years. She managed to make her way out of that, and largely as a result of some rather deep spiritual experiences she had, was able to go to grad school, eventually get a PhD in psychology, and then create the very treatment that she would have needed herself as a client at that time. So one useful sort of dialectical continuum, I think I'm actually going to draw it up here on the board. I'm going to erase the dialectical behavior therapy words. We could imagine a continuum between DBT as it was originally created for the treatment of really suicidal women who met criteria for borderline personality disorder. That still exists, and we would call it at the adherent end of a continuum. That at the other end, you could have make some casual use of the DBT handouts or concepts in whatever line of work you find yourself involved in, however you're considering what you're going to be doing. You could make some use of the very handouts that I'm posting online, or that you can find in this skills training manual, or in many other manuals now which have been written. There are a number of manuals that have been come out since this one. So this would be the casual use of DBT handouts and skills. Now, in between, I think that we could also put in something we could call Dbt Light. And this would be sort of an adaptation of DBT skills and techniques with clients who are not as acutely suicidal as the ones that were actually studied in this in the development of this treatment. So sort of outpatient, work with clients who exhibit what we would call borderline features. You could modify the treatment as it's delineated in the book. So that said, let me show you very quickly what are some of the parts of the adherent model. The full hardcore model of a DBT would involve weekly therapy, individual therapy. It would involve a DBT skills training group, usually about 2 hours, that are really focused on teaching the skills in as practical and it's more like a classroom setting than it is a therapy group. So there'd be this. There would be a Dbt Consultation Team for the therapist. In the first webinar, where I was attempting to help create a mindfulness-based behavioral community, we read through those consultation agreements. Those are a fundamental part of the consultation team. There would be perhaps a psychiatric medication with many of these clients. That can be there or not. There would also be the availability of phone coaching. This is an essential part of the DBT model, and it allows a therapist, to give coaching to the client who is called in at a difficult moment in their life. So one of the things that actually works for me, therapists have to kind of define how available they want to be. But I like being available. My cell phone charges by my bed at night, and so I'm actually prepared to take calls from suicidal clients 24 hours a day when I'm not seeing clients. Now, that said, I very rarely receive those in the middle of the night, and many DBT therapists will set hours for that they'll turn off their phone when they go to bed. But these are the fundamental parts of the treatment in adherent treatment. And again, as I said, they can be modified as necessary in other levels of treatment. Let me just very briefly mention the stages of treatment. So the pre-treatment is the process of creating commitment to the therapy itself, orienting the person to what's going to be involved and really getting them on board. Stage 1 is the teaching of skills and about how to find alternatives to the sort of behaviors that are so very life-threatening. So that would be the skills training and a focus on dealing with the dangerous symptoms. In stage 2, I already alluded that stage 2 is the trauma treatment. Now, DBT has some particular methodologies that it particularly likes. I prefer, actually myself, I do a lot of EMDR and some other sorts of treating the trauma itself, but that would truly be up to you. What makes DBT most DBT is the stage 1. So stage 2 is trauma treatment. Stage 3 is sort of the problems of living. It's very much the sorts of things that people do in relational psychotherapy and so on. And then finally, stage 4 would be something that Marcia has called developing a sense of joy and completeness. In one training, though, she actually said that this is about spiritual awakening. In whatever way people are drawn to come into a larger connection with the universe itself. So I would really call that a focus on awakening itself, but coming into contact with a sense of completeness. So that is a sense of the stages. I'm just going to go ahead and I'll have more to say about this as we go on through the course. And any of you who want to see a more complete treatment of this, you could go to my fourth wave of behaviorism paper, because I deal with this at some length there. I actually have the quotations from Marcia's books about this, as well as what she said in the training I was in. Okay, so that is the continuum and a little bit about what adherent DBT looks like. Let me now turn to the DBT model for how it is that clients come to exhibit borderline personality disorder. Now we're going to be talking about your experiences with the clients who meet criteria for this kind of life difficulties. I don't know if any of you will have yet seen anybody in your clinical work like this. You may have people in your family like this, or friends who are having real difficulties with emotional regulation. I should actually mention that actually the title of this thing was to be DBT as a treatment about emotions. And so in the two videos that this is sort of an introduction to, you can find them in the video section of the main classroom page. That's really going to talk about an emotional model that DBT kind of bases its interventions in, and the skills which allow people to adjust how they react with their emotionally to situations. But DBT really sees the arising of the kind of experiential and behavioral phenomena that we call borderline as arriving out of a combination, well, classically of sort of nature and nurture, but in particular, on the nature side, there is a genetic emotional sensitivity. And then there's the experience of what people actually have happen to them. And we see that people who are extremely sensitive in an emotional way, who are treated in an environment with a lot of invalidation of their experience, will tend to develop the kinds of extremes of emotional behavior that characterize borderline personality disorder. So going to the emotional sensitivity, we can imagine that there would be a standard bell curve of the distribution of emotional sensitivity in the population of people. So at this end, people would be relatively insensitive. At this end, more sensitive, say. And those of us who are out here on the emotional end of things, and you'll notice that I consider myself as one of those people. We are more easily triggered into emotion. We're more strongly triggered into emotion. And it takes us a longer time to come back to a sort of a regulated baseline. Neurologically speaking, someone who is kind of in more this part of the curve will take about 8 seconds after an emotional response to something, in the absence of looping of the kind that you're going to see characterizing the how emotions really work. If we didn't keep them going by our thoughts, for people out in here, they kind of come back to a calm place in about 8 seconds. For those of us who are out here at this end, it takes almost twice as long, about 16 seconds, maybe 15, 16 seconds, to come back down into a calm place. So this is genetic. If you interview people who are emotionally sensitive, you will find that there are people back in their genealogical tree who are just that way. So if you get someone who is really more sensitive, say, than the rest of their family, these folks are not going to get why a person out here would be so emotional. And this person will be told, hey, just calm down, it's not such a big deal. If you check in with some of your clients, you will see that they have received this kind of response. Now, in many families, as I mentioned, it's hard to imagine a more massive invalidation of the desires and experience of a young girl than to be sexually molested. So in some cases, you get just a massive invalidation, which is then going to do some of the same kind of things I'm going to talk about in a minute. But it's possible to get here without molestation, simply by having a substantial mismatch between a person who is really sensitive and his or her family. There are other routes by which this could go, but this is one of the really common ones. And this whole model, we call it the Biosocial Theory. It actually is a very useful way for talking with clients about how they've gotten to this place. It makes a lot of sense to them. It is not invalidating. It can also make sense to their families. You could have a person that was so emotionally sensitive that even a fairly healthy family, but not being so emotionally sensitive, would not know how to teach them the way to operate in the world that would allow them to be happier. So let's very quickly take a look at what happens when you've got a person who is emotionally sensitive and is being told by their family, hey, don't be so emotional. Any member of a family will try to kind of play along and be a good family member by trying to damp down their emotional reaction to things. And unfortunately, what they often try to do by way of that is to try as hard as they can to not feel what they're feeling, to try not to be aware of it. If we imagine another grid that actually bears a little bit of similarity to that bell curve, but is different. Here's emotional intensity here. Here's time in this case. emotions generally will start at a trigger point, and they will ramp up, and then they will come back down. Okay? If a person really tries to not feel what's going on, it is in fact possible to suppress a certain amount of emotion. You can kind of have a suppression zone in here where a person really doesn't pay attention to what's going on with them. The trouble is, though, with that is that at a certain point, the emotional intensity will spike out of the suppression zone. At that point, the person will suddenly be very upset, and perhaps too upset to be able to easily work with how to calm down, especially if they're not taught skills by a family that doesn't need them. And they will have no idea where the emotion came from. It kind of moves through time, but they've forgotten what the trigger was. So a lot of times people will describe the experience that their emotions come out of nowhere and that they are already too intense to manage. So what's going to happen? We were talking in previous weeks about reinforcement. What's going to happen given that there's actually a fairly important and significant need to be understood and met with emotions in human experience? What's going to happen to a young person that suddenly gets this emotional? And then, what's going to happen to their family when somebody gets this upset? We're talking about really losing it here. At that point, the family kind of has to deal with it. The person being upset cannot be ignored. So, the family will be paying attention to this and inadvertently, in the mix of all of this, inadvertently reinforcing the person to get really upset in order to get responded to at all. And so what this whole process results in then is sort of lack of awareness of emotions in general until it gets really super upsetting, at which point it's reinforced by the family. You're going to get a person going to extreme emotional places on a consistent basis. And that's kind of exactly what constitutes the behaviors that are listed in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for borderline personality disorder. We will go over this a little bit in the webinar on the July 3rd, and as we're sort of interviewing you all a little bit about to what degree you've experienced some of this in your lives in relation to family and friends and perhaps even clients. So this is the biosocial theory, and as I said, it is very useful as a way of talking to clients about how it is that they get into some of these places. The treatment for this difficulty is to have there be a lot of validation of the person's experience, that people calm down when they're experience being told that person gets where they're coming from. And you'll also see this in the video that is coming up in a couple of weeks. And additionally, we teach skills about how to kind of manage the emotions involved. One of which is to be aware of emotions earlier in the game because they're easier to do something about. Then even when they get extreme, what you can do, where the dials and levers are in the system. Okay, so that's about the biosocial theory. Finally, I want to talk about, I mentioned in the last webinar that I was going to be talking about the critique of the sort of patriarchal view, the patriarchal mental health establishment, the view that it has taken towards women more, but also men, who have exhibited more emotionality than is sort of politically correct in our particular society. So Marcia has raised the issue that there's really a sort of a fundamental misunderstanding in our culture of the importance of emotionality and the way that sort of lines up with gender. The net result is the pathologizing of emotion and of the women who carry it more than men tend to. So, this can be found on page 54 of this book. I'll be giving you links to all of this, incidentally. At one point she says, whereas the degree of social support received is not closely related to emotional functioning among men, it is highly correlated to emotional well-being among women. That is to say, the degree of social support received and emotional well-being among women. Studies found that the intimacy component of social support is most closely associated with well-being among women. Some of Marsh's own research concluded that women's behaviors in groups and dyads is consistent with an emphasis on maintaining relationships almost to the exclusion of achieving task objectives such as solving problems or persuading others. Given the prevalence of interpersonal bonding and social support as important, indeed crucial dimensions for well-adjusted women, one can ask this question: what happens to women who are either not given the social support they need or are taught that their very need for social support is itself unhealthy? Just such situations seem to exist. Almost without exception, interpersonal independence for both males and females is extolled as the ideal of, quote, healthy behavior. Feminine characteristics such as interpersonal dependence and relying on others, which, as noted above, are positively related to women's mental health, are generally perceived as mentally unhealthy. We so value independence that we apparently cannot conceive of the possibility that a person could have too much independence. For example, although there is a dependent personality disorder in the DSM-4, there is no independent personality disorder. This emphasis on individual independence as normative behavior is unique to and pervasive in Western culture. In fact, one can conclude that normative feminine behavior, at least that part having to do with interpersonal relationships, is in a collision with current Western cultural values. It's no wonder that many women come to experience conflict over issues of independence and dependence. It appears that there is a poorness of fit between women's interpersonal style and Western socialization and cultural values for adult behavior. It is interesting, however, that the pathology is laid on the doorstep of the conflicted women, rather than on that of a society that seems to be moving further and further away from valuing community and interpersonal dependence. So there is a lot more of this, as I mentioned in the last webinar, Marcia, especially in the early years of DBT, before it became recognized as really the standard of care with this kind of client, based on the clinical trials showing that it is simply far more effective on most measures than the treatment as usual. She was really fighting a lot of the time against sort of these sort of patriarchal views and a disdain of emotionality as expressed by women and men who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder. So that kind of consists of what I promised to cover. There will be other things coming. There is a lot to like, as I just briefly said, to like. At least I personally like it a lot because it fits my own personality style. About the way that DBT allows a therapist to be. We will be pointing you in that direction, but I think that this is an appropriate place to stop for now. I hope you enjoyed the next couple of videos, and I'll look forward to talking with you in person on July 3rd. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.